Hi, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. You have joined the All Hazards Consortium Civil Unrest virtual discussion. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Feel free to use the chat to say hello. Let us know where you're from, who you're with, and we'll get started in just about a minute.
Big crew today.
Popular topic, Tom.
Yeah, big topic.
Welcome, everyone. Just about 3 o'clock. We'll give it a few more seconds and we'll get started. Hello to Denise from Pennsylvania Psychiatric Institute, Jim from the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. Everyone else who's just joining us, feel free to use the chat to say hello.
Hi, Derek.
Hey, Luke Anderson, good to see you here. We've got James from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service out of New York City, my old stomping grounds, born and raised. Welcome, Chris from the VA Police in Wilmington, Delaware. We've got Tracy from Longwood University in Virginia. And Jeff from Warren County Sheriff's Office, also in Virginia. All right, well, as you guys are checking in, why don't I go ahead and start welcoming everyone, and then I'll go into some administrative remarks before we get started with the webinar. You have joined the All Hazards Consortium's Business Resiliency virtual discussion series, and today our topic is on civil unrest. I would like to introduce myself. I'm Laura Johnson. I'm the Director of Conferences and Events for the nonprofit organization All Hazards Consortium. I'm here to be your facilitator today, but before we get started, let me just mention a few things. First, we are recording today's webinar, and we'll send a copy to everyone afterwards so you can watch it again or share it with your peers and colleagues. And also, we welcome all questions, comments, feedback. Feel free to either use the chat, or if you have a question, you can use the Q&A function through Zoom. Probably all familiar with how that works now, but you'll see it on your dashboard. And I would also just like to remind everyone that you're all on mute. So go ahead and use the chat if you have questions. And let me introduce our Executive Director, Tom Moran. Tom?
Laura, thank you, and welcome everybody. This should be a great discussion. All of us are affected by this topic in one way or another. And so as we were talking about planning for this, there were so many angles to do this. And so I think I'm really anxious to have you all hear some of the discussion. I want to thank Stacy, Karina, and Pat for joining us. You'll get a little bit of their background. We also, if you have not registered prior, we want you to register with the private sector SICE, the Sensitive Information Sharing Environment. It's a framework that allows us to share information. It's really not going to be public, but we want stakeholders involved in our industry to understand that. So it's in the chat. It's no cost for that, but it's a way of providing you with information that will help you align different topics, get information that is produced by some of the working groups and partners. And we got some great partners on this call. So I want to thank Laura for pulling this together, as she's done a great job hosting, and as always. So anyway, let's jump into our content. I'm anxious to get started.
All right, thanks so much, Tom. So today with us, we have Stacy Irving, who's with the DVIC, the Delaware Valley Intelligence Center, part of the Philadelphia Police Department. Karina Reed with PASIC, or the Pennsylvania Criminal Intelligence Center, and Pat Scholl, who is with Harrisburg Properties. If we could start with introductions, Stacy, if you could unmute yourself, let us know a little bit about who you are.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As Laura said, my name is Stacy Irving. I am with the Delaware Valley Intelligence Center in the Philadelphia Police Department. We are the regional fusion center for covering about 12 counties, touching 4 states. And my role is really, I serve to connect the private sector with law enforcement. And that takes a variety of formats that we do that. But the goal is really to make sure that we are sharing information and that we have an important network connecting everyone, both in good times and in bad times.
Thanks so much, Stacy. Thanks for being here. Next, we'll move on to Karina.
Hi, everyone. Like Laura said, I'm Karina Reed. I am the supervisor of the Pennsylvania Criminal Intelligence Center's Critical Infrastructure and Key Resources Unit. I've been with the state police for over 23 years in a number of different roles within the PASIC. The PASIC is a statewide fusion center, and so we have a number of responsibilities on the law enforcement side, but then as well on the critical infrastructure and key resources side. I took over my position about 2 years ago, and my role is very similar to Stacy's, just a kind of a larger footprint with the entire Commonwealth being part of our area of operation, our area of responsibility. So I'm really happy to be here and have this discussion, and I'm looking forward to what we get into.
Thanks so much, Karina. And our third panelist is a little shy, so he's not on video today. Pat, why don't you say hello?
I've never been accused of being shy, I can tell you that. Good afternoon, everyone. Pat Shaw with Harrisburg Property Services. I retired from the U.S. Air Force Special Operations Security Forces in 1998. I've been in the private sector doing safety, security, and risk assessment ever since. The corporation that I work for is in downtown Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the capital. And we have a very large footprint, commercial properties, residential, retail, a lot of mixed use properties. And my primary responsibility is to ensure that our properties are a place safe to work, live, and to shop, and that the folks that come to do that and are in staff are in good order as far as being aware of what's going on around them and preparing for what could happen. So welcome. I'm glad everyone's with us today.
Pat, thank you so much. All right, let's get started with the discussion. So we have a series of 5 questions that we're going to ask our panelists today, and then we'll move into a Q&A and discussion period. So our first question is, how can private sector, building owners, law enforcement, state and local government, and everyone involved that could have a possible involvement or response to civil unrest prepare for an event where this may happen? So I'm going to start with Karina on this question.
Thanks, Laura. So I think everybody's preparation, I think, is going to be a little bit different, but I think probably one of the most important things is that developing an emergency response or an emergency operation plan and testing that in advance of any incident occurring is really important. I think having that in place, doing the testing and making sure that everybody involved understands their roles, responsibilities, procedures that go into effect when an emergency occurs. And that could be anything from, what we're talking about today, civil unrest, but anything from unexpected emergencies, tornado or an active shooter event. It's that those plans are really, really important. They include, the evacuation and lockdown procedures, as well as communication, internal and external. But then also having a pre-incident plan, some centralized location where, all of the critical building information is located, like floor plans and hazardous materials, utility shutoff, those types of things. So having all of that done in advance when it's steady state, nothing's occurring, I think is really important. And then I think understanding that, there's going to be expected and unexpected events, right? And so if there's an expected incident, you're aware that there's going to be a protest or a large scale event, walking around your facility and your site and understanding, looking for opportunistic weapons, things like banners and planters, trash cans, bricks, those types of things, and removing them or putting them into locations that can't be breached. And I think it's really important for businesses to understand the nature of their business and if they're a threat, right? So if there is a planned anti-capitalist rally, if you're a Starbucks or a bank or whatever, understanding, the nature of your business and who potentially is a threat to you and what, so then you can adjust yourselves appropriately to mitigate any threats that might occur during that particular event. And so I think if in steady state you're doing all of these things, then you're prepared for an unexpected event. These pop-up rallies that occur that become violent. If you have that emergency response plan in place, everybody already knows their roles and responsibilities and what to do if something occurs.
Very good, Karina. Thank you so much. Stacy, how about you? What's some advice for our
Yeah,
listeners today on how they can prepare?
I agree and echo all of Karina's sentiments, and you'll see that we're very much aligned in what we think folks should do or could do. No one could have predicted that we would experience the sheer number of challenges at the same time and for an extended period of time that we have. But that being said, I think we've made it through pretty well, and I think that's a tribute to everybody's resilience and determination. And I think there's a lot we can learn from the lessons of what occurred and how people have responded. I would suggest, in addition to what Karina has recommended, is that as an organization and a department that you start by monitoring the news, looking at social media, looking at current events, locally, nationally, and internationally. The George Floyd Black Lives Matter movement resonated around the world in a way that I think we didn't expect. It had a massive impact and was considered the largest social movement in US history. And still the damage is still being calculated, but it's estimated between $1 and $2 billion, which many businesses have yet to recover. So the more you're aware, the quicker you can plan and respond in the event something happens. I would also suggest that you focus on identifying and establishing those critical relationships with the key agencies or departments that you'll need during and after a crisis. And this can include your fusion centers, a Department of Homeland Security. You have your protective security advisors and your cyber security advisors. What city agencies you need to connect with, such as your Office of Emergency Management or your Commerce Department, business associations, and connecting to the neighbors surrounding your business, because you all may have to not only share information, but there may be mutual aid agreements that you need to have in place. But the goal is to know the folks around you and to establish those relationships. You also want to make sure that those organizations have your contact information as well. So if they have information, they're able to get it to you, or if they need to notify you off hours, weekend hours, holidays, during a crisis, they have a way to reach out to you. The other thing is you want to make sure that you have a trusted source, such as fusion centers or others, to receive threat information or to be able to vet information. So you may hear of something and you want to know if it's true or if it's accurate. Having those relationships, you can do that. One of the challenges I think we have with the 24 hours news cycle is that as there is a rush to get information out, usually the first round of information is not fully vetted, is not always accurate, does not have the full story. And so people will start to react and respond, which could be costly as a business as well. The other thing is that we focus a lot on making sure that looking at disinformation and misinformation or rumors, because they can not only alarm your employees, but can be costly and end up diverting resources. From a security perspective, you want to, as Karina said, you want to look around your facility. You want to see who else is in your neighborhood or what other businesses may be potential targets. Might your organization be a potential target, or your staff or executives? We've had protesters and activists who've targeted companies' missions, their investments, their politics, shareholder meetings, either what they believe that you support or represent. We even had, during the unrest, we have a number of police foundations. Their board members were being doxxed and tracked on social media to get them to defund and to not support police departments. So you don't know where it might be coming from, but if it happens to you, you want to be able to reach out and work with your partners. You want to examine your physical, internal, and cyber security. Something as simple as making sure that your address is clearly marked on the front and the back of your building. Don't assume that everybody knows where your location is. And if you are a new company that has moved to a new location, or you have created an address, a lot of companies create, a unique address. You want to make sure that that address is in the 911 system. You also want to make sure that you can access your alarms and your cameras remotely, and that you've backed up your important business and contact information. And as Karina suggested, not only looking to remove items that could be used to damage or access your building, that could include propane tanks, dumpsters, any access to your roof or loading docks. So there's a series of things that I would recommend, and I can continue that, but I'll defer to Patrick, and then, if you want to come back, or we can complete some of the additional things that I think folks might consider doing.
Oh, that's great information, Stacy. Pat, Karina, and Stacy were pretty thorough on their response to this question. What do you have to add from a private sector perspective?
One of the things that I would encourage folks to look at, civil unrest like flooding. You can have flash flooding, you can have routine flooding, or you can have major flooding. All of those can have a long-term impact. And so just like flooding, you should really talk with your insurance carrier and say, hey, if there is civil unrest and I receive damage, does my insurance cover that you have in place? The other thing is, you think about your essential support. Contractors, a lot of folks, they farm out services. They don't have in-house employees. So if there is civil unrest, our contractor is going to be able to respond to assist, either pre, during, or post event. The same thing with your employees. How are they in the loop and understanding what needs to be done when it needs to be done? And also, are you a good neighbor? Are you a good business neighbor with other businesses around you to share information as far as, if you need help with this, we got this to help you. Maybe you have this item or resource, we'll need that, but we have this to help you. So knowing your neighbors, just like in your own community, is very important. As Stacy was talking about, developing relationships, probably the number one thing in the last 20 years working in downtown Harrisburg was to develop those relationships with emergency responders, with business neighbors, with all those folks, the local hospitals, and just get to know them on a first name basis so that you're comfortable with what they're experiencing, what they can do, and what they can share with you. The other thing, as Stacy mentioned, was extremely important to us in the private sector, is just like flooding, Who's giving you the weather report? Who's giving you the forecast? So are you relying on social media and rumors and panic conversations? Or are you connected to, like the All Hazards Consortium? Are you connected to PASIC like we are? Are you connected to Pennsylvania Emergency Management as we are here in Pennsylvania? Who are you connected with where that trust and that bond is formed, where you can share and receive critical vetted information? If you think about protecting your values during a flood, most people move things to the second floor. So if on the most civil unrest that I've experienced impacts the ground level, so or something along the street level. So what are you doing to remove those items of value that, or more especially the people, to a higher floor, so to speak? Are you keeping them out of the fray? One of the issues we had a few years ago during a significant civil unrest, during a protest in Harrisburg, is trying to understand, do we lock down because we were having an event going on inside of one of our properties? Do you tell everyone you've got to get out and lock the doors? If you do lock the doors, do you let them in? And so are you got to be concerned about brand damage. I've seen where businesses, at the concern of a protest, they've shut down immediately. Others have remained open. Some board up their windows and everything right away. I guess a lot of it depends on what they experienced in the past. So you need to understand, what are you going to do with the people inside your business if you get one of those flash floods, or if you got a routine flood? One of the things that I'm sure that Karina's familiar with is in downtown Harrisburg, we had a weekly protest called Tuesdays with Toomey, Senator Toomey from our U.S. Senator. There was small protests, usually under 20 people, and it was kind of like routine flooding. When we get 2 inches of rain, stay away from this street. And that's kind of how we handled that. So then when you get a major flooding, just like major civil unrest, how is your employees or your critical responders going to get to your place of business? Is there a curfew? And how are they going to be able to get access through any police lines or anything along those? Do you have a method to identify critical contractors or employees that need to get in to take care of the infrastructure, the operations of your business? So, and do you practice incident command? Emergency responders, especially the fire department's been doing it for 50 years, but business really needs to look at that. And the other thing is, what kind of perception, when people walk by your storefront, so to speak, do they see, are you a target without a protest? Is there a lot of political, or is a lot of hot button items that you allow, or do you try to give a neutral perception? And the last thing I want to finish with is something that that we share as a business, part of our culture here with employees, with incident management, with planning for civil unrest, is we do a 4-step process. We detect, we sound the alarm, we react to lower risk, and then the goal is to get safely back in business. Some of that, like a flash flooding, can happen quickly. Some can be planned for a long period of time. But if we stay focused on those 4 steps, I think it has in the past been very beneficial and lowered our risk greatly during civil unrest.
Excellent advice, Pat, and excellent considerations. Thank you so much. All right. I am taking mental notes feverishly on this. This is great. All right, let's move on to question 2. And Stacey, let's start with you on that. If you can talk about, I know you've had situations where you are, tell us about what happened. What did you have in place that helped you, and what could have been handled better? What else could have been done?
Happy to. So Pat, we had Tuesdays with Toomey too. So I don't know how they split their time. But no, I echo all that Pat said as well. So as you know, in Philadelphia, we were faced with civil unrest and significant property destruction in business communities that were already in difficult circumstances due to the pandemic and the restrictions. and the stay-at-home orders. And as many cities similar to Philadelphia, the first round of civil unrest and looting occurred in May through June after the death of George Floyd. And in Philadelphia, we had it again in October through November after an officer-involved shooting with an individual who suffered from mental health issues. And then with the other activities, the unrest, the elections, the Capitol riot, all of those other things were layers of activities that were impacting our businesses. And like many other cities, what started out as very large and peaceful protests soon gave way to criminal behavior and destruction. And we saw an increase in the national coordination of protest movements, looting caravans, and leaderless groups, outside agitators coming in, and criminal opportunists hitting our cities that were in no relation to the peaceful protests. So you have many, a very complex situation going on. As I indicated, I am at the Fusion Center, the Delaware Valley Intelligence Center. And we are a police department, and we are an intelligence center. So we had all hands on deck. It's our role as the PASICs to identify threats, assess the risks, and provide information in real time to both law enforcement and the private sector. So one of the ways that we have been doing this for a number of years, whether it was the DNC or the Pope's visit or the Super Bowl parade, you all may remember we were that. I'm hoping we'll be there again. But so we use HISN, the Homeland Security Information Network. It's a web platform that is a way for people to receive information and to participate in a two-way manner. We call it the Business Operations Center. It is a separate portal that is set aside for the business community. And it allows us, we do one portal, the HISN portal for law enforcement, and one for the private sector. And we're able to share information back and forth between the two. So I'm able to provide details of protests, criminal activity, and city operations. It's also a place, a way that people can put information into the portal that they are seeing or needs that they may have, so that we can address those. In the first round of protests in the portal, we had about 150 participating businesses. And in the second one, we had about 240. And so the role of this dashboard is really to provide real-time, up-to-the-minute movements. Where are the protests? Where's the traffic box? What issues are we seeing? Where are there fires? Where are there other things that people need to know so that they can make good decisions? So we hosted this portal every day as long as the protests continued, for about 12 to 14 hours a day. In addition to the business community, and I tried to reach as many businesses and business types and sectors to be on the portal so that they can then send that information not only out to their employees, but also to other businesses or other folks within their network. But we also had other key partners on this portal, in addition to law enforcement and the Fusion Center. We had the Office of Emergency Management, our Department of Commerce for the city, the National Guard, the Pennsylvania State Police, and our Fusion Center partners. We also had our transit agencies, transit police agencies on the portal as well. So why was that so crucial? Well, for example, we had traffic boxes. So if streets were shut down or transit routes were detoured due to either protest or fires or looting, we could share that information in real time through the Office of Emergency Management and the Emergency Management Operations Center, which is represented by all city agencies and partners. So if there was an issue, they could go to somebody within the room and they could solve that issue. So we put in traffic boxes as a tool to limit access to certain business areas, particularly in the downtown and some of the shopping centers, in response to the previous incidents of looting. It was a very important tool to prevent further damage and loss. But if you were stuck at a traffic box checkpoint and you needed to get access, we could have the officer contacted at the location to allow you in. So that included making sure that hospitals were able to get access for patients and staff, delivery services, even residents who lived within the traffic or restricted area, the traffic box, security officers, IT staff. So the goal was really to provide not only information, but to serve as a one-stop shop for clear information and to assist people as well. In addition, we used the dashboard to ask people to check their own video cameras or their own stores and see what they were seeing. They reported it back to us. If police were not aware, we could share that information with them almost instantaneously. We also advise people through this portal to preserve any evidence or damage or other things that they might need further for insurance purposes or investigative purposes, or if they were seeking financial support, likely to seek financial support after the incident. In addition, we had a lot of problems, as you know, with banks and ATMs. We had more than 50 banks burglarized during that time and more than 153 ATMs that were attacked. And so this gave us a chance to talk to all the banks and to get information from them. We also used it to advise people to register for Ready Philadelphia or other alerting services so they could get updates on city operations. The goal was also to use it as a way that when people were seeing something or hearing something, they could post it and other businesses or other partners could ever benefit from it or could dispel whatever that rumor was immediately. I'll tell you, one of the funny things that happened was that somebody posted in our chat room a picture of a tweet that former President Trump had posted about a press conference that was going to happen that morning at the Four Seasons. We were able to take that information because nobody knew about it, notify not only our police units, but also contact the Four Seasons to see if it was indeed true. Turned out, as you may recall, the press conference, a few minutes later, Trump retweeted that it was at the Four Seasons Total Landscaping Company, which was between a strip club and a crematorium. And nobody knows yet why it ended up there, nor did the business itself. But it was that instantaneous moment of getting some information that could have had a significant impact, being able to vet it, being able to address it immediately.
Thank you, Stacey. Any other lessons learned, anything you would have done differently or things to think about as you may move forward for future incidents?
You know, I think one of the challenges that most people who use Hibson have a Hibson account, but what we did was we made sure that whether you had an account or not, that you had access. So I have a very large Rolodex, so to speak, but I continued throughout the events to make sure that we had more and more businesses or business groups or associations or others. We even ended up having folks from the visiting nurses and dialysis centers, not traditional places that you would think. So in thinking more outside the box as to who needs to be part of this, the challenge really was that it was such an extended period of time that it was, I hosted this site myself. So it was pretty daunting to be doing it day after day. So there were some logistical things that I would have done differently, but all in all, using this Hibson platform was really a critical resource for the business community and for law enforcement.
And Stacey, what percentage were people reaching out to you to be a part of the platform as you reaching out to them?
So I already sent it out to several hundred folks, but as people learned about it or other employees of companies learned about it, it grew significantly. And so the challenge was, it's really for the business community. but some organizations or associations wanted to add their board members or other people. And although it is not classified information, it is still sensitive discussions. And so that's a real struggle for me as to how far and wide this platform should go.
Okay, Stacy, thank you so much. All right, Karina, how about you? What was your personal involvement or your agency's involvement in a civil unrest incident, and how did it go?
Sure. So, I mean, I think like Stacy said, with all fusion centers and large law enforcement agencies, we're all very much involved in large events that are occurring in their state. So for us, like Stacy mentioned, we supported the RNC, the DNC, the G20 summit, the Pope visit in 2015. And really what our role in those events, we become part of the intelligence apparatus as far as identifying who could potentially be targeting this event and how would they be targeting this event. And then doing all of the intel work to identify where and who are going to be causing the problems. And that includes, the intelligence apparatus of the state police, the federal government, working together, even the local law enforcement government working together to identify what those threats might be. And then as far as the Fusion Center, we're obviously supporting the law enforcement effort. We are often brought into command posts to kind of consolidate that effort of support during the event. So PASIC has been in all of these command posts, and even command posts at the Harrisburg Capitol with like Patrick was talking about some of the events that have occurred there. So a lot of our effort there is really supporting the law enforcement community. Like I said, I took over the Critical Infrastructure Key Resources Unit 2 years ago. And I think up until that time, our role in this type of activity really, other than sort of dissemination of information to our partners about, events that are occurring and things that might occur in the future, that's really what the extent of our effort really was at the time. When I came in with COVID, we actually picked up the His and Connect room and connected with our partners. We sent out some information to connect, and we also have a similar problem that Stacy mentioned is, when we were posting information for COVID, that was really just a one-stop shop, trusted information about COVID information. And we really were not really concerned about how wide and far that went, because we wanted people to know that they could come to a place, get really solid information, get the true real links to the CDC and the Department of Health and wherever else, because any time you were out on social media or anything and you saw something, the links were, redirecting you to, fake sites and those sorts of things. So we wanted just like a really good place for people to go to get good information and try to dispel some rumors and some things like that. So that's what we did. And as things started to heat up with protests related to COVID, and then shortly thereafter with regard to protests for the civil unrest related to George Floyd and other events that occurred involving police violence, we set up a different room to share information regarding that. Now, we did not have the detailed information that Stacy had. What we provided, we worked with, we redirected people who had assets in the Philadelphia area to Stacy's sites. But to people who are across the rest of the Commonwealth, we worked with the Western PA Fusion Center. So I would be remiss if I didn't bring them up as well. they're a sister center to PASIC, and they cover 14 counties in the western part of the state. But we work together as the 3 fusion centers to at least get the business owners and operators the information about where the protests were occurring. We tried to, not through the His Insight, but through our dissemination of products, to try to identify some of the indicators of what would be a more violent protest, right? Because we got a lot of requests for people saying, hey, Black Lives Matter is going to be protesting in our small town, Pennsylvania. And really it was, you know, somebody from the high school who was organizing a rally on the corner, and they were calling it Black Lives Matter. And it was not going to be an event that people needed to be concerned about. It was a First Amendment protected activity that, you know, there didn't need to be a lot of people being concerned about. So I think we got a lot of requests to try to understand, you know, what's going to be a violent or disruptive event and what's more of a peaceful event. And I think Stacy hit on it in the last question, but the misinformation and disinformation in these types of events is really important. And having a trusted source to go to. The fusion centers do a really good job of vetting that information, taking a look, understanding, you know, who's promoting this event, who's planning on attending this event, what type of chatter is happening around this event, whether or not it's violent or not, or encouraging or in violence. So I think that, you know, if you become aware of an incident, you know, reaching out to the Fusion Center to find out more information, I think is a really good option for you. So kind of back to our involvement with this, the His and Connect rooms absolutely were, and we started using them on the law enforcement side as well. And I think those have been really valuable to us. I think the thing that we want to do better is better outreach to our public and private sector community to be able to get into those rooms and share information. We had some really great interaction with some of our partners. Most of the people that I think I had the best interaction were actually former PSP troopers who went into security at some of these private businesses. So they understood the value of connecting with the Fusion Center and getting information, and then also providing information, because they knew the information they were giving to us was going back out to the law enforcement community to be able to help them do what they needed to do to protect and you know, respond to these events. So trying to get the public and private sector entities to connect with us and understand that the information that they have is valuable to us, and we can turn it around and make it valuable to the law enforcement community, I think has been my challenge, and something that, you know, I'm working to try to figure out ways to make that better, so that they understand that they have valuable information that we can use, and then also making sure that we're providing them with value as well.
Karina, thank you. And that's a great segue to move on to our private sector partner, Pat. Pat, how has civil unrest touched you or Harrisburg Properties, and what did you learn from it?
Well, what was very beneficial, Laura, was we were allowed to be part of the planning and preparation with our public sector partners. One in particular would be the Harrisburg Fire Department, who does incident management, emergency management. So what we had in place that really helped was we had resources that was available to them for the planning and preparing process then during the protest itself. For example, we offered up conference rooms so there could be planning ahead of time, a large business conference room. We also shared camera IP addresses with our emergency management partners at the EMA, at the county level, Harrisburg Police, Harrisburg Fire, those entities, so they had access to our cameras to see what we saw. We were able to get a grant a few years ago, and we were able to install cameras. And one of the things that we did was we surveyed the fire department, the police department, the county emergency management. What would you like to see in the city of Harrisburg? What would be available? What would be valuable to you during a natural or a man-made event? And they gave us locations. We were able to do that, and it worked out very well. So we had those things in place ahead of time. And during the actual civil unrest, I was on my cell phone with the fire chief who was setting in the incident command. He was looking at cameras, our staff was looking at cameras, and I was acting as an on-scene incident commander for our properties. So I was able to share and exchange real-time information with the incident command team that was covering the event. So that was real helpful to all of us, that it was real time, real information, and that we could quickly react to it. And we had zero damage to any of our properties, and hostilities were occurring within a half a block. So that worked out very well. What we could have done better is what I could have done better. I did not identify shelter-in-place locations at our different properties. We had a skeleton crew on that were carrying out required duties and responsibilities. But what I did not go to do is I did not go to each of the property or business locations and identify this is where you want to go to shelter in place. So when it comes to civil unrest, and if you're going to have people working, employees working, you really need to identify them, show them and what they need to do if they would have to shelter in place to protect themselves during civil unrest so no one can get to them.
Thank you, Pat. And I love what you said, that I think everyone should ask their partners, what would be helpful for us to give to you, or what information do you need to make your job easier if something big were to happen? So thank you for that.
Can I just
Laura,
add?
on that? Yeah, Laura, what I was going to say to that is, if you have, if let's say, for example, your private sector entity that owns has a large population of building, maybe a hotel or a business center, something along those lines, a resort, if you dump your building or your facility, think about the burden that you're putting on the emergency responders. So coordinating with them, should we just shelter in place the 5,000 people we have within our facility until we get the word from you? Because if we just go into a panic mode and don't coordinate, and this has happened during just afternoon snowstorms in central PA, where businesses, private and public sector, have released employees, and it created more of a mess than we had to begin with. So the last thing you want to do is dump people out on the street from your facility during civil unrest.
Good point. Stacey, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Patrick, talk about, Patrick, what you did and how you supported public and private with cameras and making those wise decisions and asking those questions is really wonderful and really helpful. You know, when we have a number of cameras in the city that we were able to monitor and provide information on movements and things like that, but every place we did not have cameras and needed to see what was happening, the private sector was able to check their cameras and provide that information, which was crucial to law enforcement and to the other businesses as well. And so I'm really grateful for the work that you did in not only getting those additional cameras in your community, but in providing that real-time support.
All right, Stacey, thank you so much for that. So this, again, another good segue. We're talking a lot about coordination and partnerships, but our next question is, during a situation, how and with whom do you need to communicate? So, and that could mean, you know, you personally, Stacey, I'm interested to know who you're communicating during such an event, but also advice for our listeners on the line today on who they should be thinking about talking to. So Stacey, we'll start with you.
Okay, yeah, from our perspective, as Karina said, we're reaching out to the intelligence community, we're reaching out to the emergency management, all of the public and private sector agencies, transit agencies. What are their plans? Will they be detouring routes? Will there be a traffic box? All of the kinds of things that we need to be able to convey to other people what's happening, but also as part of our deployment and in making those operational decisions. But in addition to that, connecting with not only our federal, state, and local law enforcement partners, but business groups or specific businesses that are likely to be targeted or have been targeted in other cities, information that we're able to glean from other city agencies. We're also in contact with the other 79 fusion centers, not only our fusion centers in our own backyard, but we're connected with them every day. And so the goal is to see what else is happening elsewhere in the country. What are the trends? What are they seeing? All of that is valuable information, and we're sharing that information as well. But in terms of who people should consider communicating with, one of the things is making sure that you've identified multiple contacts at each agency and multiple ways to communicate: phone, text, social media, email, multiple ways, because you don't know where information needs to come from or what complications we'll run into, especially if it's a weather event and maybe phone lines are down or something. But also in making sure that you are connected to your city's alerting system. So almost every county and every city has a messaging or alerting system that will keep you informed of what's happening in your city or state. Police, transit, Office of Emergency Management, this PEMA, and do you use an alerting system or other way to communicate with your own employees if you needed to notify them there's an active shooter, there's some other emergency, giving them directions, giving them guidance. The other thing is making sure that you have a way to communicate with all of your staff and your stakeholders. As Patrick said, your suppliers, security, your IT, even your bankers or alarm companies and repair services. Would you have a system in place if you needed to board up a property? How would you get that information out? In terms of communicating with law enforcement, knowing your local police districts or divisions or whomever, whether it's your state police or sheriff, depending on where you are, but knowing multiple people, because people you may know and you may rely on may be deployed or maybe unavailable to you. And so you need to be able to reach other people. Connecting with the FBI, with DHS, depending on where you're located and what you might need. The other thing and most important, I think, is understanding that this communication is two-way. So if you have information, we ask that you share that information because it helps us make informed decisions and help you better. It also, as Karina said, it helps us identify what's not true and what is true. So the goal is to make sure that you also, as Patrick said, connect with your fire department. We had a number of incidents of arson fires. And so we needed to get information out as to what people to do to protect their properties as well. One of the other roles that I have is I serve as the co-chairperson of the National Network of Fusion Centers Private Sector Engagement Committee. And I see we have people from all across the country on this call. Part of our work is really to connect with people like Karina and me who are working to support the private sector all throughout all 80 fusion centers. So if you don't currently have a contact with your local fusion center, please reach out to me and I'm happy to connect you. During some of the civil unrest, Apple and some of the banks, Starbucks, some of the major companies that have business all across the country were reaching out so that we could get them connected. So they were being able to see what's happening in other cities where they had operations or staff. So really having multiple people, multiple places, and making sure you do this in advance. and making sure that they have your information as well.
Thank you, Stacy. And if you're comfortable with putting your email address in the chat, so if anyone has any questions about their local fusion center, they can reach out to you. You know your email box is going to blow up, right? All right, Pat, what about you? You talked about your relationship with police and fire, and then, of course, your employees. Who else do you communicate with during a situation?
The other folks that come into play are the people that I keep me gainfully employed. So they may, as you mentioned, Laura, I'm a little shy, so they may not want me on camera. So a public information officer, and I saw we had some question in that in the chat. A private sector business should identify who's going to speak for them on camera or have some prepared press releases to go out. And the other thing is, it shouldn't really conflict with the public sector partners you're working with. So the goal is to be one team, one fight. So it's important to have the right person in place that can talk for your business. So I wasn't the one chosen to do that. We had our president and CEO was going to do that role, to speak not only for our business, but other business owners in downtown Harrisburg. So I think that's important to be able to contact them. Now, here's what happens, as everyone on the call today knows. Landline go down, cell phone can go down. Do you have a two-way radio? And how about email? And when's the last time you sent a runner to tell somebody to do something? So you really got to look at all your avenues of approach to communicate. And I think it's important that you do that, but having that relationship ahead of time is the best way to communicate real time.
Yeah, totally agree. Don't wait for the incident to happen. Keep those networks warm, I always say. Karina, anything you want to add to this question?
No, I think I would just echo, you asked us kind of both ways, who do we communicate versus, who should the public and private sector business owners and operators communicate with. And I think I will echo Stacy in that, connect with your fusion centers, try to get that information, the real information. And then also, if you're aware of information you're getting, if you become aware of suspicious activity, or you become aware of information through a social media post that you saw, or whatever it is, that you're communicating that to your fusion center. So I think that that's really important. And then other than that, I think, we talked a lot about communication methods. So, right, email and phone and text and, various, but I would say testing those as part of your emergency operations plans. You're testing all of these things, and you're testing your communication networks. So Pat had said something about two-way radios. Are you on the same frequency? Like, do you know what frequency all of your people are? So just making sure that the communication between, the security personnel and the first responders, that's up and running, and that you're testing that. And, if somebody changes something, that, an email changes or something like that, that all of that information is communicated out. And if you're regularly testing your plans, you're able to identify where things have changed and where you have to update your plan. So that was all that I wanted to add.
Great, Karina, thank you so much. All right, our next question. What are some considerations during the recovery process after the incident? Stacey, if we can start with you on this question.
So from, kind of the lessons we've learned from what people had to do and are continuing to do, both from the civil unrest and also from some of the weather, the flooding that we recently had. So the first thing is really being able to document any damage or loss for insurance replacement or financial support or law enforcement purposes. whether you have a continuity plan in place that's going to allow you to continue operating, or you're able to adapt to operating if you cannot be at your location. We've all learned how to work from home, something we never thought we'd have to do. Having a system in place to communicate with your staff and your stakeholders and customers or suppliers. What do you need to do to get up and running, whether it's on site or remotely? Understanding that some of your employees may not be available to you. They may be dealing with their own crises at home or in their families. They may have suffered, in this case, flooding damage or other kinds of things. What kind of accommodations can you make or arrangements? But they need to know when you'll reopen and whether you're going to be able to pay them during that time. Having arrangements in place in the event you need a generator, heating or cooling equipment, or vehicles or other tools that might be critical to your operations. If you are not able to be at your location, making sure that you are clearing signs that you are not there, including the buildup of mail. If you've boarded up your businesses, we ask that you continue to check on those businesses to make sure somebody hasn't lifted up the boards and gone in. We had one case where at a Wawa, they were able to see on their cameras that some thieves had dressed up as construction workers and put on vests and hard hats and appeared as if they were repairing the window when they were actually burglarizing the business. In addition, if you are boarded up but you're still operating, you want to let the police know so that they know that you are open for business. As I mentioned earlier, having an emergency fund and cash in the event that other payment options may not be available to you. Connecting with other businesses nearby that you may be able to help each other. Knowing that if you are likely to seek financial relief, that you have your financial documents both up to date and accessible, and that you've got backup of all of that. Also acknowledging that there's an emotional toll on business owners and employees and communities when a business has been damaged due to civil unrest or vandalism or extreme weather or fire. If the damage is related to criminal action, people often feel very violated and betrayed. If it's damage from weather, it's still a significant loss, but it's less emotional in terms of feeling as though people you've supported, have violated you. So recovery is not just replacing what's lost. It also can be traumatic and something that I think should be recognized. Lastly, being aware of fraud and scams and schemes that often occur after an emergency or a disaster. Research any offers or contacts before you share your vital information, and making sure that you're able to update your website, a voicemail message, or social media during your recovery, because that's where people will be going to see what's happening and when you're open and other kinds of valuable information.
Very thorough, Stacy. Thank you. Pat, anything else you want to add to Stacy's great list?
Yes, I would encourage people to consider the safety liabilities as you reopen. Everyone wants to get back open for business. That's why they're in business. Is your property safe? And if you deal with insurance carriers and liability, slip, trips, and falls on a routine basis, imagine after civil unrest, how safe is your property to enter, to walk about, to shop, or to purchase services, whatever it may be. A lot of people don't always give that consideration, especially the exterior, like your sidewalk, your windows, is there broken glass? What hazards are laying around, or that an employee or a patron could end up getting hurt? The other thing I think we ought to think about in the recovery process is, and this was a good point brought up to me by Chief Enterline, the Harrisburg City Police Chief, is having a responsibility for the homeless population in your community. Who's looking after them pre, during, and post civil unrest? Oftentimes we're so focused on all these other areas, the people that really have no place they call home or where they could shelter in place are definitely impacted by civil unrest. So I think it's important that, you know, as you recover, how are you recovering, and how are you safely doing that? And how are you helping those that might not be able to help themselves in that recovery process?
Okay, Pat, thank you. Karina, anything to add?
Just the only other thing that I had to add is, you know, when you've experienced a disaster, or civil unrest, or a natural disaster, there's often grant programs and funding available to help you with the recovery process. And oftentimes that's where scammers take advantage. So just making sure that you are getting information from the appropriate sources, you're aware and paying attention to the type of assistance that's being offered, and that you aren't taken advantage of by a scammer. And then the only other thing that I wanted to add is, you know, as you are identifying vulnerabilities that from your incident, that you're looking at ways to, when you're recovering, shore up those vulnerabilities and make sure that those things are taken care of in the event that there's another incident, that you've taken care of that particular vulnerability.
Okay, thanks, Karina. And we also want to hear from our listeners. If there's any considerations that you know of or thought of, feel free to put that in the chat. And then we're going to move on to question number 5. How can private sector help states and law enforcement, and how can law enforcement and states or the Commonwealth help private sector before, during, and after an event? And are there any resources, tools that you can share with our listeners today to help in this process? So Pat, can we start with you on this question?
All of us have spoken a lot about answering this question in the previous 4, but one thing that's really important is that you might think that the resources you have in your private sector business would be of no use to public sector, but it really, really is. You think about sharing a conference room so meetings could take place, or giving access to cameras, that sort of thing. The other thing that's really important is, and we have a local emergency manager, security director for a hospital here in downtown Harrisburg, and he has history information of man-made and natural events that's impacted Harrisburg, along with photos. It goes back close to 30 years. He's been there almost 40 years. So he's able to go back and say, okay, this is an event that happened then, this is what was impacted, and this is lessons learned. So I think it's important that sharing, having an after action report and passing that along to the future generation, so to speak, of both public and private sector would help the resilience that we're looking to do. All too often we forget real quick and we move on to the next problem. But along those lines too, there's something we did in Harrisburg about 15 years ago after a bomb threat at the federal building, is private and public sector folks got together and we organized a downtown working group. And we met, and then we had, obviously with COVID, we had to meet virtually, but we talked about scenarios that would impact all of us, not just isolated incidents. And we brought in subject matter experts. We kicked around ideas, we argued with each other, and we developed relationships out of that to where, okay, so if we get civil unrest, what are we gonna do? You mean you're not gonna provide 25 police officers and 2 fire trucks to protect my business? Are you serious? I thought that's what my taxes were for. A lot of people got an education over the last 15 years that we've been doing that, where there's no longer unrealistic expectations, it's realistic expectations. Who can do what for you and what can you do for them? So I think that tool is the most important tool, and that's a relationship tool about what you can share, what you can offer, and what you need. And usually, just like in your neighborhood, if people work together, usually the chance of risk is lowered, and you're reaching out to folks like PASIC and getting good information, or PEMA, or whoever you're working with. And that's the tools that you can share, is relationship.
Absolutely. Well said, Pat. Thank you. Karina, any other thing the private sector can do to help you in your job, or any recommendations you have for our listeners today?
Yeah, absolutely. Identifying and reporting suspicious activity. So, there's so many eyes and ears out there. There's things that are happening. People become aware of information. They don't know what to do with it. Identifying, what's suspicious. If you don't know what is suspicious or what needs to be reported, all of the fusion centers have various training programs on recognizing suspicious activity and where to report it. So I think, that's something that is really important for the private sector to help law enforcement. And I think encouraging that through your staff and advocating for suspicious activity reporting is something huge, not just for any particular event, but just in general, so that we have a unified understanding of what the threat is. And something really, really small that seems like not really a big deal to somebody, but is out of the ordinary, can really turn into something really important and could hopefully help stop something from happening that that we wouldn't want. So I think encouraging suspicious activity, understanding it, getting the training on what that looks like is really important. And I think Pat hit on something really good too, is the communication ahead of time on expectations. Like he said, I think, if you are expecting a certain kind of response from your law enforcement partners, make sure that they know what that expectation is, because they can tell you that, hey, that is not what we're going to be able to do. This is how we're going to be able to respond. And this is how quickly we're going to be able to respond, because then that will help you address your emergency operation plan in a way to understand how long it's going to take for law enforcement to get there, what resources they have available to bring to the thing. So that communication ahead of any event is vital.
Thank you so much, Karina. Last but not least, Stacy, you talked a lot about HISN. What other advice do you
Yeah.
have for?
Yeah, I just want to say that I love both Patrick and Karina. Your points are really well taken, and it really important for folks to recognize. I think also in looking at history, really taking the time to research with the internet and everybody having a smartphone, there is so much information out about what has gone on, what people have, what has taken place, how have cities or companies responded and recovered from unrest or other types of business interruption. As I said in the beginning, in terms of monitoring the news and social media and being aware of what's going on, is the same at looking at how companies have handled active shooter, any of those kinds of things I think are very important. As Patrick said, conducting what we call a hot wash or after action report. So how did your business or your company respond to the pandemic, to the civil unrest, or the recent weather emergencies, or a cyber attack? So what did you do? What worked? What didn't work for you? And what kind of resources do you think that you need? As Patrick said, in terms of what things that the private sector can offer to law enforcement or the public sector, one of the simple things that I asked of everybody during this extended periods of civil unrest was, did they have R&R places where law enforcement or first responders could go into a business, use the restroom, get a break, take a moment, away from the chaos. And I was grateful that so many people stepped up and offered their place to the National Guard and to others. As everybody has said, and we've talked about this entire time, is establishing relationships and nurturing them. Understand that there's going to be turnover, so that it's important that you have multiple contacts. Really, nothing is more important or valuable than being able to pick up a phone or send an email and have someone you trust on the other end who can help you either with what you need or information. sharing information that you have with law enforcement or city agencies, not only so that we can vet it, but it helps all of us as a team make more informed decisions and response. As Patrick said, you know, he is connected to a lot of businesses. We work with a lot of different sectors and associations, and I've tried to identify each group and work with as many people as possible so that we can connect to them. But if you are not currently part of an association, either your type of business or your community or the chamber or other kinds of folks, I would highly suggest that you join those associations and reach out to other businesses, reach out to your suppliers as well. You know, have all of these companies in a database, but having all that information where you can access it remotely. As I said, although not all fusion centers can provide the same level of support, they all can provide real-time information and troubleshooting. So connecting with your fusion centers. And lastly, as I said, protecting yourself from fraud and schemes, and making sure that you are verifying anything before you put information out and share information to make sure that you not only are protecting yourself, but that your community and other fellow businesses are not a victim of these schemes as well.
All right, Stacey, great advice. Thank you so much. And I'd also like to thank those of you who put some great comments in the chat for things to look at, including comms and so on. So we're about to move into our Q&A period. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to type it into the chat or in Q&A, and we'll open that up to our panel. We do have a question here. If you can provide any advice on differences in response to different types of civil unrest. So would you respond differently if you've had, if there's a, you know, police violence protest versus a post-football game loss or big win even, or anything else? Or do you respond this, or do you prepare and respond the same? Karina, do you want to take that one?
I think for us, we don't. I don't think that we respond really differently. The only difference I think for us would be maybe the extent of time that a particular event might occur. So, you know, if we're talking about, you know, a post-football game type situation, to be honest, PASIC, unless it was something egregious. I mean, PASIC really, the State Fusion Center would not really be involved other than maybe assisting, like if the DIVIC reached out to us or the Western PA Fusion Center reached out to assist in kind of taking a look at open source information to see what's coming out, we would assist that way. But other than that, our planning and preparation for that type of stuff wouldn't really change, other than timing and staffing, how many people we would devote to a situation or an event, and that would just depend on what it was. You know, if it's a police violence type incident, we've seen that those can extend multiple days over multiple weekends or weeks. That would create a staffing situation for us that we would have to address, versus, you know, something that might happen pretty quickly and then go away.
Yeah. Makes sense. Thank you. Stacey, Pat, anything to add to that? Different types of incidents?
No, I agree in understanding the nature of the incident and the need for staff or resources. I think the challenge that we all found ourselves in 2020 and early 2021 is that we had multiple events all occurring at the same time. And I have participated in scores of tabletops, and no one would ever have believed that we would have all of those things happening at the same time. So I think all of the things that we have recommended to folks are all the basic foundation you need in preparing and protecting your people and your business. And, you know, again, in terms of having those connections, so that if we can distinguish what actually is happening, what information we know, so that we can share that information with folks as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. Those are all the questions that we have so far. So as we wait to see if there's any last minute that come in, I'd like to take a minute to thank the three of you, Stacy, Karina, and Pat, for taking the time. Obviously, we're well prepared with your answers. And so I know you put a lot of time and effort into doing this. And also thank you for the work that you do in your everyday. So we appreciate you being on this panel today. And I wanted to let our attendees know too that the All Hazards Consortium has a couple events coming up, dates to be announced very soon for our Global Threat Intelligence webinar and how to block some cyber threats. And also our second annual Business Resilience Exchange Summit is going to be January 25th through the 27th. Registration is complimentary, so for everything that we do. So feel free to visit us at our website, ahcusa.org, and get yourself registered for our summit. And wanted to also give you my email address, laura.johnson@ahcusa.org, in case you have any questions for any of our panelists today, or if you have any thoughts about additional webinars or anything that we can help you with. So I see no more questions. So again, thank you to our panelists. I appreciate you being here. And everyone out there, I hope this was helpful for you. We'll send you the recording. In the meantime, stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much and have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.